And there we go. All right, Shayla, is that working? Great.
Great.
Okay, so we're going to start with a pretty straightforward explanation of how things move through the process in Vermont. And the short explanation, the spoiler is that it's pretty much just like how they do it on Schoolhouse Rock. It's really pretty simple. We only have one little twist in our system, our process that I'll explain as we go through, and that's first, second, and third reading. That's one little kink that we have in our process. So I'll go through the boxes here. So bills are introduced. Note that the budget is statutorily required to start in the House. So the budget always has an H number, an H identifier, and always starts first in the House. But for most bills, it doesn't matter. Each house can go, each chamber can go first. Doesn't really matter. In Vermont, it's unusual for bills to go through both chambers at the same time. They usually have a conversation. The leadership has a conversation about which chamber should go first. So it's not both. It's one and then the other sequentially, not in parallel. So the bill gets a first reading, and that's when it gets assigned to a committee. 98% of the time, this is totally no drama, just what you'd expect, totally normal. If there's a bill that talks about health insurance, it goes to the healthcare committee. Like there's no question about that. There are some instances though, where what committee the bill gets assigned to is the subject of some drama and some politics. So, worth noting that every single step of the way of this process, there are kinks, there are twists, there are turns, there are exceptions that folks like me are watching very closely because there's always something that has a kink or a twist or a turn, and you always want to be on the lookout for that. But under the normal circumstance, after the bill gets first reading and someone standing at the podium in the chamber introduces the bill and says the bill is assigned to the committee on blank. So that goes to the committee. The committee then does its process. The committee is not required to do anything. There are some states where committees have to do something with every bill that's introduced. Not in Vermont. They don't have to do anything. Bills sometimes get referred to as being stuck on the wall, which, like a lot of these phrases, is a complete misnomer because every bill's on the wall. Every bill has a card and it's stuck on the wall. It's a long story. The point is, when people say a bill is stuck on the wall, that means that for whatever reason, it's not going anywhere. It's pinned in place. It's not moving. That may be because the chair has decided they don't want to do it. That may be because leadership has said they don't want to do it. There could be other reasons. The committee is not required to do something. It's usually the chair and the internal politics of the committee that decide what happens when. The committee could rewrite the entire bill. The committee could make small changes to the bill. The committee could throw the bill out and start all over again and do what's referred to as a committee bill, which has a whole other process that I won't go into today because it's basically the same as this with a few little changes. It's not worth going into. But basically, the committee has free reign to do whatever they want. The only way it comes out of committee is if there's some text that gets passed by a majority vote. Again, there are ways that you can get bills out of committee without that, but that's very much an exception to the rule. So the committee has to vote affirmatively by a majority to get a bill to move to the next step. It may be that it has to go to other committees because it has multiple jurisdictions or because there's spending or taxes in it. So it has to go to the committees that are responsible for those things. Eventually, if it gets majority votes all the way through, it goes to the floor of the chamber. That's referred to as second reading. There's debate. There can be amendments. The bill gets voted on. If it gets voted on by a majority affirmatively, it goes to third reading. There can be debates. There can be drama. There can be amendments. Eventually, if something gets passed affirmatively by a majority, it goes to the other chamber, and the whole process starts all over again. After the second chamber does its process, there's then an opportunity for the two sides to come together. That's the box there in the bottom center. Sometimes there's a conference committee where 3 members of each chamber are assigned and come together to try to work out an agreement. The only way a bill comes out of a conference committee is if 2 of the 3 in each chamber agree. It's not 4 votes, so it can't be like 3 of one and 1 of the other. It has to be of the 3, at least 2 of the 3 in each chamber has to agree for a bill to come out of conference committee. Then it goes to the governor. And in Vermont, the way our system works is the governor can either sign it, veto it, or let it go into law without signature. There is no such thing as a pocket veto or a line item veto in Vermont. So it's either signed, vetoed, or go into law without signature. So that's the process. Let me pause there to see if anyone has any questions about the basic process. Again, if you have a question, the easiest thing to do is to just take yourself off mute and ask, or you can put it in the chat. Or if you raise your hand, we'll probably see it by a notification, but the best thing to do is to just chime in if you have a question. Note that I cannot see your body language. So if you're not happy with something, sorry, you're gonna have to speak up either verbally or by chat, and we'll do our best to make the session meet your needs. So let me know if we're not getting you the information you're looking for. Okay. So the budget. What's really important to note about the budget is that it takes almost a full year for the whole process to happen, which means that if you want to have an impact on a fiscal year budget, fiscal year starts in July, you need to start the previous July. It's very, very strange to think that your advocacy has to be that far in advance, but it does. The fiscal year starts on July 1st, and during the summer, the departments of state government are working on their budget requests. They develop requests and send them up the chain to the agencies. The agencies then look over those requests in September and October, and then send them all to the governor. Generally, when we talk about advocacy, we think of this period from July to October as being a relatively open time for discussion with the state agency folks. It's not fully transparent. It's not like there's big open sessions for discussion, but there's always some unofficial or back channel opportunities to get your thoughts and comments to the relevant regulators and administrators so that they can hear what the field is thinking. Once you get past that October timeframe, the budget goes into a black hole. And the governor's office starts drafting the governor's recommended budget. And they don't talk about it at all. Discussions with the public at all about anything. And so there are always exceptions to that general sensibility. But the season for discussions with the administrative folks is really that July through August time. I'd note that's also the time when we encourage our folks to be working on their legislative asks as well. So it's the period of idea germination. Note that there is a budget adjustment process. In order to understand that, you have to jump ahead. Remember, we're in the middle, according to this chart, we're in the middle of a fiscal year. And so by the time you get to December or January, you're halfway through the year. And so things have happened. Budgets have risen and fallen, programs run hot or cold. Maybe there's new revenue, maybe there's a revenue shortfall, maybe there's a new grant that came in. As with all of us who run organizations, there's always things that change and budget revisions. And so there's a budget revision that happens officially in the Budget Adjustment Act that starts in the House and goes over to the Senate. And that starts to happen in December and goes through January. Some years it gets stretched out into February and March. But the heavy lifting is usually done in December and January. And that's an opportunity to have a say in what happens with the budget in an interactive way. We'll come back to that later. In mid-January, the governor releases their recommended budget for the next fiscal year. You can see in late January now the BAA is usually passed. There's a weird period of time when those two ideas are crossing, which can lead to some confusion because you're revising the current year budget while you're talking about the next budget. And that can be a period of some confusion. So it's worth noting if you're tracking the process, there is a point there where sometimes wires get crossed. As we move ahead, in January and February, the House Appropriations Committee reviews the governor's budget. And the House Appropriations Committee is just finishing that up this week and next. February and March is when the Senate Appropriations Committee really starts digging into the budget. The House passes their version of the budget by usually the third week of March. Sometime around the end of April, the Senate passes their version out after they have gotten the House version sent over to them. By late April and early May, the conference committees are meeting And hopefully by the middle of May or the end of May, the budget gets sent off to the governor. So that's the process. Does anyone have any questions about this part of the narrative, or observations or stories to tell? We have plenty of time in this session for people to share stories. Shayla, anything in the chat? No? Okay, great. So let's look at what's happened in the current time. And this actually, there's a typo on this page. Look at that. That should say FY22. Oops, sorry. I won't try to fix that now. So the FY22 budget, the governors recommend. There are relatively few surprises. There weren't that many policy initiatives that were being proposed compared to past years, at least not in our area. There was a very large focus on one-time expenditures, and I'll unpack that in a moment. And as far as we can tell, there weren't a lot of ups and downs. There was some uncertainty about certain pieces, and it's not entirely clear, but it's actually been a pretty quiet time for the base budget for the proposals for FY22. Again, apologies for that typo. Now, there's a really important distinction here between one-time and base funding. And that has a big impact on a lot of the discussions that are going on. It's pretty much what it sounds like. One time is for things that happen once or are allocated only once. Base are allocations that are intended to be ongoing and essentially permanent. Now, there's a little bit of a misnomer there because, as we know, the governor can recommend whatever they wish every year, and the legislature can do whatever they wish every year. So just because something is in the base doesn't mean it's really permanent. It just means that the starting document that they work on has it in there, and that in order to change it, they have to actually do something. So if something is in the base funding, when you copy and paste, as it were, the current fiscal year budget and start a new one, that travels with your copy and paste, right? So it's in there when you start your draft of the next year. If it's one time, when you do your copy and paste, it doesn't show up in the new draft because it's one time. So every year you have to affirmatively make the decision to put it in there. It isn't assumed to be in there unless you change it. I haven't ever done that explanation before that way. Was that, Shayla, I can see your towel. Was that clear to you what I was trying to explain?
Yep.
Okay.
And we did get a comment that the visual and your narrative are very helpful.
Oh, good. Okay. Again, all of that is available for download at the Whova site, or we can email it to you or whatever you might need. So again, the FY22 governors recommend. The big news there was all the initiatives that the governor's recommending to fund with one-time money, housing, some environmental initiatives, and the IT systems, which include the Bright Futures Information System, the BFIS system for CCFAP. Some big pieces were in there that generally the legislature thought were pretty good ideas. And the discussions about the budget, there aren't any big initiatives in the budget at this point that I know of that are creating a lot of heat. It's not a done deal. There are lots of questions. There's lots of playing around with things. If one of your issues is one of those little issues, then it's a huge issue for you, which we totally respect and understand. But the backdrop, the context is relatively calm compared to most years. All right. Any questions or comments here? Okay. So to repeat or to expand what we talked about before, there are multiple budget processes that are in play right now. There's the budget adjustment process. There's the normal budget process, which in theory would end in May, but this year may very well be extended. It could be extended into June, or they could have an extra session because they're trying to figure out how to allocate the one-time federal relief funding, the what I refer to as the CRF, Coronavirus Relief Fund, although that is not actually the accurate name, but it's just a catch-all for these things. The federal funding that's coming in, they have to allocate all of that. I'm going to talk more about that in just a minute. Some of the money is being dealt with through the Joint Fiscal Committee. and their process, which is ongoing. And there are also additional bills that are being passed unusually that are either budget adjustments or additional appropriations, like the one that's being considered in the Senate right now, H315. Very unusual, but in this time, they create separate vehicles to allow these conversations and decision-making to proceed so they can get money out the door. Let me pause here. There are a number of things to unpack on this slide, but let me see if there are any questions before I go on. Yes, Sheila.
There is one. Where can early childhood educators view the early education budget or the governor's recommendations?
The short answer is there isn't such a thing. There is a governor's recommend. The most convenient and accessible version of the governor's recommend is 1,400 pages long and filled with codes that I have to struggle to understand myself. That's the easiest one to understand. There is not a single early childhood budget. Our programs and issues are spread out all over the place. There are different versions of that though, and Morgan Crossman is raising her hand to tell you about one way that BBF is trying to organize that information. Morgan, you're up.
Thank you. So the State Advisory Council in this year has proposed that we create exactly that, an early childhood budget that talks about all the different financial and resources invested for children and families across the state of Vermont, prenatal to age 8 and maybe even age 12, if folks were listening to H171 discussions yesterday in House Human Services. So this is something that has been done in the past, I think, and Riva is on as well. I think the most recent time this was done was in 2015, and we do have that example to be working from. So it's something that we're moving towards, but doesn't currently exist for this most recent year.
And I'm gonna push back, not push back, I'm gonna provide a different side of this. I don't know how you do that for housing, for instance, right? There are all these housing programs that are set up to help families who are experiencing homelessness. And it would be very difficult to parse out what part of those programs affect kids of certain ages because they aren't all set up that way. Same thing, there are certain mental health services that affect families. I mean, there's no question the work that BBF has done in the past and they'll do in the future is going to help get clarity on a lot of these issues. But I think, frankly, to toot our own horn here a little bit, this is what the Alliance is here for. To get a full picture of all of it is essentially impossible. And so what we try to do is encourage communication and collaboration so that if there's a particular issue that you're interested in, we can get you to the right organization so you can weigh in on that issue. But yes, it would be a lot easier if there was a single place to go to get all this information. I'm not for a second disputing the utility of that, but bear in mind that any product like that is going to necessarily skip over or have to mush together certain aspects that if there's a particular issue that you're interested in, it may not be fully evidenced in that kind of presentation. Riva, I see your hand raised. Tell us more about the historical perspective and other aspects of this, please.
So I think partially what Morgan was trying to say is, yes, every part of state government pretty much touches every single Vermonter, but we do make certain investments. Honestly, you could take a look at the housing sector, and I know that the agency has done it, and look at what the investments in housing look like. And so many states, including Vermont, have been interested in looking at what the investments in young children look like in particular. Because after school care is considered in child care, that's why it's going up to age 13. But there's a real interest in understanding what the combined investment of resources for children under the age of 5 are, because it's not a public entitlement program. And part of the intention expressed in H171 is that it becomes that. And it's hard for the legislature to decide that it's going to go there unless it has an idea of what it's going to cost. And also, to be honest, the recommendations from the National Institute of Sciences is that states look at certain funding streams and analyze how they're working with each other and how they're not. And to the degree possible that the state combine them at a state level so that they come down to childcare programs in a mixed delivery system in a single funding stream. So that's just sort of
Right.
the direction of a better child, like the whole build it back better childcare system. You have to understand, and the investments are big. They're well beyond childcare. You can ask lots of people on this call. There's also home visiting, and there's a whole lot of other things. What you have to do that is what BBF will do is define what you're measuring, be really clear about it, and then report out. And that just gives you, it's sort of like if you want to paint a picture and you throw all your colors at once, everything's brown.
Right.
If you try to be a little bit more discreet and be careful about how you lay it out, you get a much clearer picture of what's happening emerges, and you make better decisions with a clearer picture. So
Right.
I'm pretty excited about it.
So let me thank you, Riva, for adding that. Let me clarify my comments a little bit, because when I listen to you, it really clarifies in my mind why I'm making this distinction. If you want to have the policy discussion that Morgan and Riva just described, I think in a very compelling way, you have to do the process that they just articulated, and they can help you figure out how to get plugged into that. I'm an advocate. I'm an advocacy person, right? I'm a lobbyist. I want to get in on the decision-making of the now. That's my perspective. So when I heard your question, I heard the question of someone saying, I want to understand what's going on and I can figure out where to plug in. How do I do that? So from my perspective, the kind of document that described can actually not be as helpful in figuring out where you want to push a button and how you want to get right into it. So if the question is, how can I figure out where my voice can be heard now and where can I get plugged in? You might do better just get in touch with us directly and we'll get you to the right organization. If you want to be involved in this bigger policy discussion, plug into the BBF conversation that Morgan talked about and that Riva just described so well. That's a really exciting conversation. We need to have it. It's essential for us to have good policy down the road, but it's a long-term discussion that may not serve you if what you're asking is, how can I figure out what I want to do in April with my advocacy time, right? So I want to honor what they just described and acknowledge my own bias that I hear things through the, I want to talk to a legislator now lens, because that's where my head is. So I hope we heard your question I hope we heard your question appropriately and we gave you a variety of answers that help you figure out how you could proceed in your advocacy path. Anything else, Shayla, for questions right now?
Nope. It was just a comment about great clarification. Oh, here's another one.
Yes.
How can I get connected and begin advocacy?
How can I get connected to?
How can I get connected and begin advocacy?
So the best thing to do is take advantage of our curbside pickup. Seriously, like just call or email us, and it is one-to-one service. We'll talk to you individually and help you get plugged in. You can talk to me, you can talk to Dan Brown, you can talk to Amy Rosso-Perler, who is our communications person, but also can help you with this. Different flavors, different people, you can also, Shayla can get you plugged in if you want to do that. If you want to specifically do the childcare bill, Shayla can help get plugged in with someone from LGK who can talk to you about that. Different organizations are doing different activities. So, but the short answer is just drop me a line and I'll be happy to have a conversation with you about it. We really want to cater your entry to your areas of interest because each area of interest has a slightly different path and different context. We want to make sure you get the best entry for your, best time management for you, best bang for your buck, because we know your time is precious. So I'm not meaning to be evasive, but we try to tailor it to meet your needs. All right, Shayla, more questions or?
Oh, I just put our email addresses in the chat.
Great, thank you. All right, so let me unpack this slide a little bit. We're almost done with the slides. We have until 12:40, is that right? Yes?
11:40.
I'm sorry, 11:40, right, not
Yes.
12:40,
Yep.
11:40. Okay, so let me just unpack this a little bit because it sets the background for the next slide or two. So this administration has done a great job, in my mind, I'm biased here, has done a great job of opening up the process for allocation of the federal relief funds. They aren't required to do a process at all that involves the legislature, but they have. And so there's a lot of stuff going on that involves different parts of the legislature that tries to make sure that the allocation of resources that comes in from the federal government is done in a responsive way. So that's the reason why the Joint Fiscal Committee is involved. That's a group that usually just does kind of administrative activities when the legislature is not in session to make sure that the wheels can keep turning in January through December. But in this context, they've been thrown into a much bigger management system, and they're one of the ways that money is expedited to get it out the door. There's some of the federal money that has been put into a special pool that the administration makes a request and the Joint Fiscal Committee reviews it, and it's an expedited way to move that along. There are other processes that involve a more traditional legislative process, and those can be rather extended, and there can be a lot of different ways for folks to get involved with those discussions. Just to quickly review, there are three, with this in mind, there are three different committees. There's the House Committee on Appropriations, the Senate Committee on Appropriations. For those of you who like to keep score on these things, note that there's been a lot of change in the House Appropriations Committee. New chair, a member of the committee was elevated to chair, and similarly, someone was elevated to be ranking member. So the head of the room, the front table has two new members on it, or rather one new member, but people have different seats. And there are new members to the committee as a whole. Representative Harrison, Representative Shai, Representative Squirrel, Representative Tolino are all new members to the committee. Appropriations, there have been two changes with retirements and changes. Senator Baruth is now on the committee, and Senator Ballant has taken the pro tem seat, and so she is on the committee replacing the former pro tem. And then this is the House, this is the Joint Fiscal Committee. You can see from the abbreviations, they're the senior members from the money committees, as well as one or two at-large folks. This is mostly the usual suspects. This is the group that's working on, again, the administrative activities that are intended to move the process along and keep things going more quickly. So that is the end of the overview. I'm going to go back to this slide because I think it's the most generic one. And we do have now about 12 minutes for comments, questions. If there are topics that you did not get answered that you would like to get an answer for, this would be a good time to ask that. So ask away. Anyone have any comments, surprises, questions?
And feel free to just shout them out. Oh, here's one. Are there other funds for us to access other than the COVID relief fund?
I think the short answer to that is no, but I don't think that's really the right answer to your question. There's the regular state budget money. Let me actually, I'm gonna give you a little seasickness here. Let me flip ahead here through the slide deck to get to this slide. In some ways, this is an answer to your question. The short answer is no. There's the state money and there's the federal relief money. Those are the two buckets that we're working with. But because there's so much money sloshing around the system, it gets a lot more complicated. There's money that was allocated in 20 that hasn't been spent. There's money that's freed up that was supposed to be spent that is not going to be spent. There's money that's actually coming back to the state because of changes in the regulations. And then there's money that the federal relief, the federal relief money is going to take the place of the usual state spending, which frees up state spending to do other things. So the short answer is it's basically just two types of money: state general fund and federal relief money. But actually, it's a lot more complicated than that, which is one reason why in the previous session, the CRF session, we talked about that if you're looking to advocate for funding, you need to get your plan organized or your ask organized, and then just start asking legislators for help finding money for it. Don't try to figure out where the money will come from too much, because it's very complicated, all the pots of money floating around. And that's a different conversation that I'm happy to have with someone offline. But no, I think again, the answer to your question is there isn't some other pot of money. But Riva, you have some thoughts on this. You have to unmute.
Yeah, one thing I'd love to mention to providers is that H-171, which is just, as somebody mentioned earlier, just been voted out and is likely to pass, right? Has a huge, and I've been doing, the work I do now is projecting some new programs. The impact on those projections of the rate increase in October cannot be undervalued. So people should be paying attention to that. Because rates are going up hugely for all kids in CCFAP in October, and more families are going to be eligible if it all passes, which it looks like it probably will in this session. So what's really important is that if you're running a childcare program, you make sure that every parent who's potentially eligible is applying and taking advantage of the program. The worst possible thing would be to underspend that money this year, making people think that we don't need the money. The rate increase will help a lot because that's automatic. Every assisted kid, this is the child care financial assistance program. Every kid who's already eligible, you'll get rate increases for, and the program will now pay full rate for any siblings. It's a big deal. It's going to be a big, I've looked at the programs that I'm doing budgets for, and the change in the state investment is big.
Right.
So all of you who fundraise extra, just pay attention and make sure that you, because you know families better than anybody, make sure that you are encouraging families to apply for the program so that they can get the help and that you can get the resources and we can spend this money that's in the budget.
Right. All right, I'm going to stop the share so we can do a better job of monitoring the chat. So we have just a few minutes. Let's see if we can get through additional questions more quickly. Shayla, are there other questions?
Yeah, there's 3 right now. So the first one, I'm going to take them in time order, is if early ed becomes part of the AOE, does that change how we are funded?
I think the short answer to that is that proposal is not going to be seriously considered in the next fiscal year. That's not going to happen in FY22. So that question would be very relevant if the proposal were to actually move forward. And if it does, then those questions will have to be fully unpacked. But since we have a lot of other things to worry about, and it's not going to happen in FY22, we are not having an in-depth conversation about that issue. And I don't mean to be evasive. It's just that there's a lot of other really important stuff that everyone has to focus on right now. So since we don't have to focus on this, we're going to put it aside.
Next question, is there material or information coming out for sharing these exciting changes with parents?
That's more, I think that's more a DCF question, a CDD question. I am sure that there will be a lot more information available once it becomes clear what's actually going on. And there is going to be a BBF webinar on this. I believe it's going to be on the 16th next week on one of the programs, but the discussion, the changes that Reva's talking about, still we'll need some rules and regs to be written, but yeah, stay tuned. And if you're not hearing information, then get in touch with LGK or with the Alliance, and we'll try to make sure that information gets out there. I think that's the best answer to that question.
And there's a couple of other that I'm just going to synthesize because they're all around the same theme, and it's how to access the new rates, where to find them. And it looks like, Reva, you popped something in that said you requested the proposed new rate caps from CDD and you're happy to share them.
Right. So this is a small piece of the bigger puzzle. Look for more information on all of this soon. That's not what this session was built around. So I don't have any of this information. And I'm sure it will come from the division as soon as it's available.
And Reva, you have your hand raised. Would you like to say something?
No, sorry.
Oh, okay. All right, I think I got everyone's questions. If I did not get your questions covered, please yell it out or speak it out.
Reva, just a quick question. So you do not have those income guidelines yet, but you'll share them when you get them?
So the income guidelines are the 2020 federal, there's actually a lot of information on the House Human Services site where the bills are, because the CDD did do presentations where they shared some of those things. The new federal poverty guidelines will be the 2021 ones. So those are actually, you can get those online and factor them in. But I actually wrote to the Department for Children and Families with a public information request, requesting a full schedule of the new rate caps, and they gave them to me. If lots of people write to them for a public information request, they maybe will post it quicker than they would otherwise.
Morgan Crossman, maybe you can talk with Riva about this offline so we can make sure that the information flow is happening appropriately on this.
I
Great.
appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, Shayla, any more questions?
I don't see any more questions yet. We have 4 minutes left, and I have one update before everyone hops off.
Right, and so this is now time for me to give the wrap up and the sort of pep talk part of this. As I said at the beginning, the purpose of the session is to give you background and context so that when you are making your asks, your elevator speeches to legislators, you have the background and the context. And when they perhaps get a little evasive and talk about the process, you know what they're talking about, and you can engage them directly and have that background so that you can get to the point, tell them what you're asking for, tell them why it's important, and give them a sense of where things are in the process, right? That's the idea here. We want you to have an ongoing discussion with legislators. We've been trying to move ECDL away from the one-off sensibility and rather as part of an ongoing relationship that you have with your legislators. We've done our best to make the sessions at lunch be as close to how they are in the ballroom as we can. We've tried to match legislators up by region. There might be a few who have to be out of region because we can't arrange the tables the way we used to when we're in the real world and the physical space. And we think we have it lined up, but note that it's a Zoom conversation, so we can't have 3 conversations around a table at the same time. That's going to be a little frustrating for folks, but we're doing our best to make it work. And again, the purpose of today's session is to give you that grounding so that when you do have your 90 seconds that a moderator at each table is going to help make sure everyone has, that if you need to put it in the context of the budget, you have a little bit more of the jargon, of the lingo, of a sensibility that will make your ask that much more effective. So that's our goal here. All the slides are available on the Whova site. We're available anytime to ask detailed questions, maybe not right at the moment. I just got a text from one of the other workshops saying, can you give me information? So we'll do our best to get you information as quick as we can. We're here throughout the legislative session and all year long to try to support you and your advocacy. Please be in touch if you have any more questions. Shayla, pass it over to you to do the admin part as we wrap up.